Hey everyone, welcome back to the Multilocation Marketing Show. My name's Elliot Olson, and I am joined here with Matt Nickols. We're your co-hosts for the Multilocation Marketing Show, and this week we're talking about a topic that I think we both think is really important to and relevant to multi-location businesses. Some industries more than others, but definitely something we're excited to talk about, and that is brand and legal compliance and how that's related to local marketing, the issues that can come up with that. How do you manage those issues? Yeah, just kind of wanted to start out, maybe Matt, with you just kind of describing, what is brand, compliance? What does that look like, and what is legal compliance? And then we'll kind of get into why that's important, why those are important.
Sure. So, these are issues that people have, whether you're a multi-location business or not, but multi-location businesses tend to have a lot more issues with it because, number one, they're generally marketing across state lines, sometimes in multiple countries, different municipalities where there's different legal guidelines and rules. And from a brand perspective, depending on your network, some multi-location businesses, whether you have franchises or dealers or agents, if you have an independent network, a lot of times they're responsible for repping your product and brand, and you kind of lose control in a lot of scenarios of, how they're using your brand. Are they putting a huge stretched logo out? Are they, not keeping product and service information up to date? So that's when you think about brand compliance, that's really what we're talking about. Are you adhering to the brand standards and the guidelines and the way that the parent organization wants the brand portrayed? You do so much work and effort in building a great brand, and then to have a loss of control over that when your local representatives are trying to do marketing where they're not following the guidelines. And, we've had so many crazy scenarios of, local representatives just butchering a brand, or they've got a website with, product that's been discontinued for 3 years and those kinds of things. So from a branding perspective, most marketers, they love to have that control over things. And so when you have scenarios where you're trying to support franchisees and dealers or agents or, other types of locations or local representatives, you sometimes can lose that control, and that can do damage to your brand. So it becomes, very important to keep people in compliance, for those things, as well as, your marketing strategies and best practices, because at a corporate level, generally you have more time and expertise to figure out things like your target audience and your personas and the target demographics, and what messages are resonating the best and what conversion strategies are working the best. And so in addition to just like the branding elements, you want to have adherence to the strategies and the things that work, rather than having people at the local level trying to reinvent the wheel all the time and getting a total mixed bag of results, that can be problematic. On the legal side, the big difference there is there are legal issues more and more as we've gone digital as, a society. Everybody has a public website. And so there's just a slew of legal and compliance issues that you have to worry about. So if you have one big corporate website, you still have to put effort into that and make sure you're in compliance, but you have complete control over it. Where when you start going the local marketing route, a lot of times people feel like they're losing control over that. If people are doing their own social media posts, if they're managing their own website, there's so many issues now. So just like to name a few, obviously there's certain industries that are a lot more, have a lot more regulations and rules on them than others do. So, if you look at healthcare, financial services, banks, mortgage companies, investment advisors, those types of things, there's a lot of regulation around what they can say, what they can't say, not promising too big of a return or saying you're the best, you can only be one of the best, right? So there are things just in your marketing. Obviously you can't make false claims about a product online. It's there, it's public record. If you're misrepresenting a product, that can cause legal issues. And then you've got, a lot of this new thing that's come up over the last few years with consumer data, protection of consumer data, letting people opt out of tracking them. So you're probably familiar with GDPR, which is in Europe. It stands for General Data Protection Regulation. And so if you have customers browsing your website from Europe, you could be liable for GDPR types of issues. California launched their own called CCPR, California Consumer Privacy Act, that is very similar, where you have to have certain things on your website that you're doing or statements that you're making that make consumers aware of what you're tracking and what you're not. And they have to, so that's why you see now almost every site you go to has a thing where they're popping up, to accept cookies and tracking. And so you can decide if you want to do that or not. Another big one has become ADA compliant or ADA compliance, right? Accessibility. So based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, they've actually said that if you're a business over 15 employees, you could be liable for, you have to have your site has to be accessible to people that have handicaps like, blindness or color blindness or, different things. So there's different ways that websites have to be set up to work with a screen reader and things like that. Especially if you're in the public domain, public services like banks, healthcare, those types of organizations. So unfortunately, there's been a lot of things going around where people might see that a site's not ADA compliant, and so then they just get like a class action lawsuit or just a lawsuit against that company because they're out there trying to make a point and getting people to adhere to these things. And so we've had several clients that it was never an issue, and then they got a lawsuit against them. And so they had to implement ADA compliance. And so that can be a big thing that a lot of businesses are thinking about today as well. Things like COVID, with the COVID pandemic, like different states had different regulations, and maybe it didn't impact specifically like you're responsible for putting something on your website, but maybe it's, you have to tell people like, what the guidelines are for coming into your facility, or you might have to have policies that fit in line with the government for, doing a home service and how you're handling that, or people just want to know that information. And that can vary widely from state to state. What you do in California is a lot different than what you have to do in Texas, for example. So those are all things, that kind of fall under compliance that people have to deal with. And especially if you're a multi-location business, again, you can span different states, you can span different countries. And so those are things that can become very important to keep track of.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you're a multi-location business and you're listening to this right now, some of you may be thinking, wow, this is something I wasn't thinking of. Some of you are like, wow, I think about this every day, and keeping track of content and the regulations and trying to understand what's new and making sure things don't slip through the cracks is a really big challenge. And so creating systems for and processes for being able to manage those different compliance related issues, really, being able to see across your different or, your entire network of locations, are they adhering to your branding standards, can be something that's just really challenging. And so kind of wanted to just ask you, Matt, I think you have something for us, but just wanted to ask you, how do we begin to, what's a strategy to deal with this challenge? Obviously, there's a lot of complexity, especially when it comes to multi-location businesses. I mean, you're talking anywhere from, even if you have 10 locations and you're trying to you're trying to maybe talk with your different local, if you have brick and mortar stores, you're trying to talk with them, your managers about how to update stuff on site, maybe their websites, or maybe you just have a corporate site and you're trying to make sure that things are correct. Where do you kind of start, and and making sure that those things are correct and everything's happening that needs to happen? And, what's a strategy we can put in place to kind of remedy some of these challenges that businesses have?
Yeah, well, it is a challenge, and just like in some of the other podcasts we've talked about, the first thing that I typically recommend is you got to track, what your legal compliance and your brand compliance issues are, right? So you got to know what they are. They've got to follow guidelines. Here are the different assets that they're using. We've got to check these things or get approval. But also, like, what are different regulations on a state by state basis? If there are different things, like, obviously there are some like municipalities that have certain regulations that have to be followed. So like if you're in New York City, for example, or Los Angeles or Chicago, there's probably specific things in those markets. It could be any city really, but so you could have like city level stuff, state level, country level, right? And depending on your industry, there may be a lot more, a lot less, but at a minimum, you should look at, okay, if these are national kind of regulations, making sure that we document what are all the things that are important to our business that we need to be aware of, right? And so you could think about that as like creating, and we've created like a basic tool that you could download. You can look at the show notes here and download it as a starting point, or use something that you've created. But at the end of the day, it's kind of what are the national requirements that we need to follow. So if we're trying to do ADA compliance, like we got to list that out. If there are certain COVID types of things, whether it's our own company statement of how we're handling things or it's state regulations, if there's licensing requirements that have to be displayed, if there are, marketing messaging, really documenting all those things out, and I would start at a national level and then, state by state of all the states that you're in. And then any municipalities that have certain regulations that you have to follow as well. So I think the first step is just being aware of all those things that need to be there. And obviously some industries, as we talked about, are much more regulated than others. But getting those requirements down and then having kind of your locations all defined as well. And then you can have checklists of things that they're doing or not doing, how are you handling those things? And that gives you at least a good idea of what you have to be aware of and make sure is correct, right? And I would say, this is one of the biggest issues that kind of, in our experience, has caused people not to do local marketing the way that it should be done. Because really good, best practice local marketing is localization of all your content, your information. And a lot of organizations, the only way they've been able to figure out to make that work is by getting participation at the local level. So the people at the local level are responsible for doing social media or doing web content, blogging, because they need that unique, locally relevant content to be, on those sites to really get traction and do things that they're trying to do. And so organizations that have a lot of compliance related things or are just kind of scared by all these things that are out there, they sometimes freeze up and say, like, we don't want anybody doing anything. And so they just bring everything under corporate control. And the downside of that is they're not getting that value of the localization because all the big tech players, whether it's digital ads or organic visibility, social media, they're really rewarding that local relevance, that local feel. That's what consumers are looking for. And so if you don't have any of that, or it's just really general, like location pages on a corporate website, then that really tanks your performance in the local markets from a marketing perspective. But on the other hand, people, and rightfully so, are thinking like, well, this gives us all this kind of exposure to all these things that are out there, and we don't want to risk that. And so they end up doing nothing, or just having kind of, a national presence, and they're not impacting the local, nearly as well. And so it's kind of a catch-22. So strategically, I think it starts with, putting together a plan, first understanding, like we talked about, what are the areas of compliance you need to be aware of? How do those vary, by the different jurisdictions that each location's under, municipality, for example, state and country. And then, what are the requirements that you have to have in place? So that's kind of, a starting point. And, there's different levels of figuring that out and managing it, right? So there are platforms that deal with kind of compliance related issues. You could have a massive spreadsheet and have a plan, but you're going to have some process in place, if you really want to be able to maximize your local marketing. If you want people at the local level to participate, typically what we see being done that works pretty well is having kind of a review and approve process. So they can't take anything directly, posting stuff on social media, they'll send it in and it will get approved by corporate and then go up. Some companies have compliance officers at each location, and they're dealing with that at the local level. Now, that's not a great solution because it's very tedious and time consuming and just makes marketing a lot more difficult, but people still do it because of the return that they can get, at that local level of marketing. So next level up would be, maybe you could have some really good training in place and guidelines so that the local people really understand what those issues are. But again, they make mistakes, they're humans. And, whenever you get a lot of people doing a task, you're inevitably going to have mistakes. So strategically, I think, getting a technology in place, especially if you have a lot of locations, is really going to help you. So kind of what we talked about is like the tools generally aren't going to have like, this is what all the compliance requirements are, for each location, right? Now in your industry, there may be specific tools that help you manage certain types of compliance. For example, in the ADA compliance space, there are several software packages that you can use to look at your website and see if there's, any issues with ADA compliance. And there's different levels of compliance that you can try to adhere to, single A, double A, triple A, and each one of them, just has more granular things that you have to do to be compliant. So some of those types of technology tools can really help in your compliance. And then obviously from a marketing platform standpoint, like at MarketSnare, what we do is we have the ability to have local websites that are unique, but they can be completely locked down where at the local level, they can't do certain things, to change a legal statement or product pages that have, accurate descriptions of information. But you can give access to participate in areas that you want. You could have a review and approve process where they can start to publish something, but it goes up, someone can look at it and approve it, and then it just gets published. So, having a software platform that kind of is in between all this stuff and helps to manage it really makes life a lot easier and enables you to do a lot more without having, so many systems and delays, and it can speed things up so that it's a lot more tolerable, a lot more efficient, and doesn't provide such a drag on your marketing. So that's typically what we recommend. You lock down certain assets, you provide them for the local people, and then you have guidelines for the things that you are letting them do. If it's a really big compliance issue, you can have review and approve where everything gets looked at and approved. And so there's the same thing that we can do, like that we're talking about with a website, with like social media, for example, that they want to do a post, it can go up, it can be looked at by somebody and then approved. So there's at least 2 eyeballs on it before it goes out to catch things. You can do double approval processes, obviously things that are, more important or have more consequences, you want to have more checkpoints in there to make sure that they're going through correctly. So I think those are the big things. You can look in your industry for those things. You can put in processes, and then having tech tools that can allow you to do marketing and localization, but having all those things vetted at the central level and then being able to lock down what people can and can't do at the local level based on your rules and your comfort level, really go a long way to kind of streamlining the process and helping you sleep better at night, knowing that, somebody at the local level isn't going to go do something that's going to put the whole company in financial trouble or, legal trouble by their actions. And that's really the key. But I would say the effort is worth it, right? Because marketing, localizing your marketing efforts really pays off. And so you don't want legal compliance issues or brand compliance issues to stop you from doing all the best practices at the local level of really, each of those locations really getting that great organic visibility, highly converting ads, reaching your audience and having a local feel. That is so important, to your overall brand and business development strategies and marketing and lead development and all those things, that you don't want legal compliance to get in the way of doing that. So as you start to pull it all together, you understand, what your risks are, what things change per location, then, find the software to help you stay in compliance, find tools like MarketSnare or other tools that can allow you to manage the local assets and tactics at scale with being able to lock things down so that they don't get you in trouble from a compliance, monitoring things, review and approve processes, and being smart about all that. If you do that well, there's no reason that you can't, bring the power and reward of localization into your marketing as a multi-location marketer without having to, create so much overhead and baggage that's just not worth it. And that's really the challenge I think that marketers have in this area today.
Yeah, totally. Like I'm just thinking through my head the differences between, perhaps a mortgage company or a banking client versus a franchise that, wants to offer. Like some companies just don't have an option. There's no way they could let their locations have control. They have to have control of everything. Yep. And so for them, it's more, well, how do we produce content? How do we, make sure everything is written in a way that's specific? But then you've got your franchisees or franchises that's like, they're having meetings about these questions when they begin to create the franchise. How much control are we giving them? How do we solve these issues? And so I think you hit a lot of great points on just kind of how you can mitigate that mitigate legal and branding compliance issues regardless of which camp you're in. And so, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's the same with brand. I mean, brand issues are so important, as we talked about. Those can be very costly, as well. It may not come with like a legal consequence or a lawsuit or exposure in that way, but it certainly, degrades your brand and the work that you're putting into it. So having control over all those things, is really important. And I just think a lot of people have said, well, we just got to do this all on our corporate website and do that. But there are tools out there like MarketSnare, like others, that will allow you to, be able to run these types of programs and get the value of localization without, putting yourself in legal jeopardy. And so just exploring those different tools that are available. But don't let compliance, whether it's brand or legal or all these different things we've been talking about, get in the way because the upside's so high. I think most marketers realize that. And the ones that can't do it, they're like, I'm looking for something. I don't need a tool. Just give me a way to do it because we want the value. We want the growth. And our local people are clamoring for it, but we just haven't been able to figure out a way to do it. So that's why we wanted to kind of talk about this topic, because I know a lot of people are concerned about it, but there are good solutions out there that can help you overcome some of these challenges. But it is a big challenge and it is a big issue. And unfortunately, it prevents a lot of people from doing what they want to do from a marketing perspective because they have these issues.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't need to be said, but if you're going to work with a company to help you with your marketing, make sure that they understand how important this is to you. There are a lot of companies that, are used to maybe working in certain fields where legal compliance or ADA isn't as important, or maybe they don't work with companies that are over 15 people and, ADA isn't important to them. You just got to make sure that you're, working with a company, a software or agency or whatever that, understands what you need to actually make happen and has experience with that. And so you can, so you're getting, using your resources wise that way too, hiring the right firm or whatever. So, anything else you want to add, Matt? I think you covered a lot. Give a lot of really good information.
It should really be a part of it. Any strategy you put in, you just got to be thinking about that, both on the brand side and the legal side, and what you need to lock down, what you want to be able to allow people to do at the local level, and how you can really enforce those things and measure and track them and protect yourself and them, also getting the benefit of, that great localized marketing. And so that's really the key. And it's just kind of being creative. So it just starts with understanding what you have to comply with, and then coming up with creative solutions and technologies that can be utilized, to make sure you're good, while not taking away the benefits of, best practice local marketing. So I've said that multiple times, but
driving it home.
Yeah, I just can't underscore enough that, there always are ways to deal with it. There may be some trade-offs, but you can make the trade-offs a lot less than if you just said, we're just not going to do anything. Because
don't let brand and legal compliance issues get in the way of developing a local marketing strategy that can really benefit your organization from an organic visibility standpoint. There's so much opportunity there that people miss out on because they're so concerned with just compliance issues, and rightfully so. It's a big deal, and it can have a lot of financial ramifications. Cool. Well, Matt and I we're talking about this all the time with clients all the time. So we'll have our information in the show notes. If you have any questions about strategies, or just want to hop on a quick call to kind of brainstorm how you can develop systems for your organization, we'd be happy to talk with you. This has been another episode of the Multilocation Marketing Show. And we are excited to, meet you guys next week. So have a great week, everyone.
Take care.